In this video, I'm going to take you behind the scenes and show you all of the key looks that the ISAMAYA beauty team created for the New York, Paris and London Autumn-Winter 23 fashion weeks. So the first show we worked on was Dion Lee in New York. Dion's clothes are always very sexy, there's kind of leather, he uses a lot of references of insects and kind of reptiles. So for this show, we went with the kind of reptile-inspired theme, and Dion's team laser cut these scales from the actual designs of the fabric, and we placed them on the model's heads. So we layered them to create this really beautiful iridescent snake skin on the forehead, and then made the skin look really gorgeous and glowy with skin lac, and we used a little bit on the cupid's bow and the cheekbones just to make everything look a little bit kind of sci-fi and extraterrestrial. The next show I worked on in New York was Thom Browne, and as the ISAMAYA beauty teams got their beauty sleep, Thom Browne for me is one of the most special shows that I work on over Fashion Week. Often we have to create multiple characters, and this year was no different. It was very much based on the Little Prince, so we had the fox, we had the Little Prince, we had the aviator, the roses, these planets. There were just so many different makeup looks to create. So it allows me to have a lot of fun and to really push myself and also my team to kind of really go there, and it's very exciting and sometimes quite stressful, but we always end up with a very, very gorgeous result when we work with Thom Browne. Another of my favourite shows this season was Collina Strada in New York, and I think we could maybe say that this was like the wackiest show I've ever worked on. The whole idea was, you know, don't eat my friends. Models were dressed as these animal hybrids. We had everything from dolphin headpieces to horses to reptiles. We would look at references from the materials and the fabrics, and Hilary had really strong ideas about how she wanted each animal to look. It wasn't a literal representation. It was as if the clothes had kind of blended through their human skin and out into their animal faces. And it was just a lot of fun to create something somewhat comical, but also really, well, it was just comical, wasn't it? It was really silly.
It's that Fashion Week diet.
So then we came to London, and Lowe was the first show that ISAMAYA Beauty worked with in London. Obviously Chet's got a very kind of expressive and quite graphic style within his clothing. We kind of went with this very asymmetrical spiky lash concept, and I was inspired by the kind of spikes in the clothes that he makes. Because the lashes were really the star of the show, I wanted to create a really beautiful, perfect skin that kind of looked very clean and kind of pearly and iridescent, and so we used the skin lac to create that, and then we used the sweat from the industrial palette on the lids and on some of the high points, just to give that kind of otherworldly, really beautiful iridescent glow to the skin. So I suggested that we colour the models' tongues so that when they come out at the end of the runway, they stick out their tongues, and then you've got this really like great blast of colour, and then they can kind of walk down the runway and do this whole kind of gothy thing. And it worked really well, and I think, you know, that was actually a really, really fun and interesting show to work on. The next London show was Mowalola, and it was a very exciting show for me because I felt like I was kind of maybe breaking new ground personally in my approach to makeup, because it felt very tech inspired, and the hero looks were putting these LEDs on the face to make it look like they'd kind of grown out of the skin, and we had to basically kind of airbrush new skin onto the models' faces to create that kind of weird AI, fake human, very freckly kind of skin texture. And the whole show was kind of about the dark web, and so it fit really nicely, I think, with that theme. Moving on to Paris. The first show that I worked on was the Balmain show, and I worked with MAC Cosmetics for this show, and it was a really, really beautiful, elegant, elevated show, and we were just focusing on really sheer beauty. You know, we bleached everybody's eyebrows, the skin was immaculate, they had these gorgeous kind of big, glowing, glossy eyes. It was like perfection. And, you know, Olivier's tailoring was just so immaculate, and it felt very sculptural, and elegant, and I think it was just nice to walk into the Paris scene and do something that felt very kind of true to the Parisian style. The Off-White show in Paris was the first time I'd worked with the brand. We'd done a couple of days of fittings and makeup tests, but actually it all really came together in a very spontaneous way backstage. And I think that's really the key to working with a great team, is being able to do things kind of off the cuff and trusting each other. So Jawara had these eyelets, I guess you call them eyelets, these little pieces of metal that he was weaving into the hair and into braids. And we just decided spontaneously to cover one of the model's heads and another's sort of face and head in these eyelets, so they had this really kind of cool cyborg metal effect, because it kind of tied in the theme of the show, which was this lunar delivery, so it gave us this kind of outer space feel, kind of something quite sci-fi, but it also meant that the garments were really being carried through into the hair and makeup. We also did a couple of details like silver on the eyes, and some of the models had colour on their brows, so that it almost looked like the clothes were reflecting so brightly off their bodies, and they were kind of hitting their faces and hitting their brow bones and colouring their faces, and so it was just a really nice way to add light and texture into the face. So the next show that we worked on in Paris was Vivienne Westwood, and of course this was a really, really important show for everybody involved. Things kind of just developed quite organically as a team, and when we're all backstage working on the show, I work with Sabina the stylist and I work with Andreas, and we kind of look at the models and decide what would kind of complement their features the best. Tell us what you did for the hair.
We were just inspired by Vivienne's own hairstyle, so put a bit of clips here and there, and that's it.
Nice and easy.
Nice and easy.
So there aren't really set looks that we go into the show with, but we work very much as a team backstage, looking at the models, deciding if they need an accent of a red lip or they need a classic kind of Vivienne brow. And this year was extra special because a lot of the makeup references were taken from the way that Vivienne approached makeup herself. Though we had a massive mood board of images of Vivienne with her own eye makeup, her kind of classic punk aesthetic, her weird kind of two-tone lip-linered looks. And so for me, it was just a really great opportunity to kind of be inspired directly by her and to translate it onto some of the models. The last show that we worked on in Paris was Ottolinger. You know, their clothes are just so interesting and unusual and quite kind of futuristic. Sometimes we just want the girls to just look their best, and we don't want to do like a really big makeup look, but we want to add details that again will just accentuate maybe the shapes or the mood of the garments. So for this show, the focus was on the individuality of the models, making them look really their best, focusing on skin, highlights, glowiness, and then on a few of the girls we did this kind of quite beautiful winged eyeliner that just tied in with some of the kind of deep graphic shapes in the collection. And then on some of the other models, we went for quite a classic kind of smoked out look, just as a point of difference from this winged eyeliner. But again, it just worked really beautifully and everybody kind of had their own mood. So I hope you enjoyed that roundup of the ISAMAYA beauty team backstage at all the shows in London, New York and Paris. See you next season.